Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 26 towards the end of week 1, which was a pretty interesting week, all things considered, especially now that we're seeing these people actually play and sort of comparing how I thought about these people just a week ago in the preseason. Now, I am recording this on Tuesday, July 23rd. And if you're new to the channel, or if you only follow Big Brother through the episodes on TV, I will heavily be discussing what has happened on the live feeds and spoiling what happened in the veto competition, as well as the veto ceremony. So if you don't want to be spoiled, feel free to click out this video now. But there are 16 people to talk about, and so wasting more time, let's get right into the actual video. So starting off at number 16, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is Kenny. And it was actually a debate here over who to actually have at the bottom here, as normally on Big Brother, the person I have at the bottom of each week's power ranking is the HOH's target for this week, as well as the person that the majority of the house is going to vote on by the time of the actual vote. And Kenny is not necessarily that. He's not Angela's main target at this point. That person is actually Matt, who is on the block with him. And I feel like if the vote were to happen right now, I feel like Matt's the most likely person to be voted out. And had I recorded this video yesterday, I would not have had Kenny at the very bottom. However, there are two main reasons why I went with this placement here. One is the AI Arena twist that's going to be playing out on Thursday night, where each of the nominees are going to be playing this competition, where the winner of that gets taken off the block. And with Matt seeming to be the better competitor on paper compared to Kenny, I feel like that kind of gives Matt the advantage here to get off the block and be safe for the week. However, the other reason why Kenny is at the bottom is because of what's happened in the past day, where Kenny has basically admitted that he's not going to try to win the AI Arena comp, where he feels like Matt is more deserving to stay in the game compared to him. And at this point, it feels like Kenny's kind of given up, even though the majority of the house would probably vote out Matt if Matt were to stay on the block. So I feel like those things really harm Kenny to where he is at the very bottom here. Now, if we're taking all that aside, Kenny's game here is still pretty bad, where he was kind of on the outs, not really playing as hard compared to the others, and he was put up as the main target initially due to him being seen as his consensus target along with Lisa and Kimo. And while he does get kind of unlucky during the week with Lisa winning the veto in a spot where she had become a bigger target compared to him, as well as the AI Arena comp that prevents Matt from being outright taken out of the game, I feel like Kenny himself has still not played particularly hard, and you even have him not even wanting Matt on the block, where he thought that Matt would have stayed over him, which is also a misread on his end. And obviously the fact that he's now kind of given up on the game and isn't really playing that hard outside of that, I feel like there isn't really that much upside to Kenny anyway. And with him having kind of given up and him seeming like the next most likely person to be voted out if Matt wins the AI Arena comp, I do have him here at number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and we have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Matt. And Matt is obviously Angela's main target at this point. He was backdoored after Lisa used the veto here, and he's someone who the majority of the house plans to target if he stays up on the block. And as I mentioned with Kenny, had I recorded this video yesterday before Kenny revealed that he's not going to try to win the AI Arena comp, I would have had Matt at the bottom and would have said that Matt is on his way out. Where even though he still has a shot of winning the comp anyway and staying in the game, I feel like Matt is already in a pretty rough spot moving forward, even going into next week, where he ends up being this very overconfident and delusional player over the course of the week, where right at the bat you have him trying to create his own power structure and targeting Angela when Angela's the HOH. That's not a great look there. And while he does create this trio of him, McKenzie, and Leah, that group clearly becomes a minority over the course of the week, and he ends up pushing away other people that were willing to work with him, where Tucker is someone who had wanted to create a final two deal with him, only for Matt to turn around and leak that to the rest of the house, and for Matt to later throw Tucker under the bus after the veto by throwing out Tucker's name as a replacement nom, and even telling Tucker to his face that he planned to have him go up as a replacement nom, which completely turns Tucker against him to where Tucker wants nothing to do with Matt moving forward. You have Joseph, someone who also wanted to work with Matt and use him as a shield moving forward. But during the course of the week, Matt ends up being so hard to control that Joseph distances himself from Matt as well. And while now he's part of the barber shop, that itself is a pretty weak alliance where the other people within that have plenty of other options within the game and are clearly going to turn on Matt if he stays up on the block. So I feel like Matt himself is in a pretty bad spot, has played pretty poorly, and doesn't even seem to realize that he's playing poorly either, where even despite his deteriorating position, he has continued to be pretty overconfident in his abilities and is pretty aloof to the fact that a lot of people don't actually want him in the game, where he thinks he's running the game. And while you do have to give him a little bit of credit for getting into Angel's ear about possibly putting up T-Core or Tucker as a replacement nom over him. I feel like that was more so due to Angela being very paranoid over any effective work that Matt was doing. And I feel like with Matt playing pretty poorly here, I can't have him much higher here than number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and we have another player who's playing pretty poorly at this point, but at least they're safe for the week. But we do have Lisa, and Lisa is largely how I expected her to be, where I didn't really expect much from her coming into the season gameplay wise, and so far I feel like she's been a pretty terrible player. Now I will also say that she's pretty delusional about her game as well, where she came into the season thinking she was never going to be nominated at all during the season, only for her to go up at the first nomination ceremony, which is pretty funny. But despite her going up as the pawn due to her not having many connections, she ends up making herself the target, where she ends up having all these one-on-ones after like being nominated, which causes a lot of people to be uneasy about her. And it's kind of crazy how the target shifted from Kenny to Lisa here, where Lisa probably would have gone home had she not won the veto here, but she does win the veto, which is pretty good there. But even now, even after she is saved for the week, I feel like she's still not in a very good position, where she's not really part of any clear power structure. You also have a lot of people not really trusting her, with a lot of them assuming that she has the upgrade power, even though it should have been pretty easy for them to figure out that she didn't. And she continues to have pretty bad reads on the game, where she thinks Matt is running the game, where even though she wants Matt to leave, she doesn't want to vote against him due to her thinking that he has to vote to stay when it's pretty clear that he doesn't. And I don't have much faith in Lisa moving forward. Now, there's a chance that she could be dragged deeper into the game. There's a chance that she could just continue to win more content moving forward. But I feel like Lisa has clearly demonstrated that she's not very good at this game. And it wouldn't shock me if she ends up either like being an early boot or being someone that is kind of dragged to the game while not having much respect in the game. So I feel like for those reasons, I do have her here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have another pretty messy player, and I'm not too sure how long this person will last, but we actually have the current HOH, and here we have Angela. And the fact that Angela was able to win the first HOH, considering she is an older woman, is probably a good sign for the show, considering they have been implementing these more equitable cons, both in reindeer games and in this first week. Now, who knows how long that will last on the season, but for now, I will say good job in production. But with all that said, I don't think Angela is playing this game particularly well, where she does initially do good work in creating her own power structure, which is what you'd want to do as the first HOH. But I feel like that crumbles pretty quickly, where you have Matt trying to create his own power structure on the side, but also you have Angela's own paranoia that kind of drives a lot of people away, where I feel like Angela doesn't handle a lot of people particularly well. And I feel like through her paranoia, she doesn't really have a clear understanding of what's happening in the game, where you have her own blow up with Matt over the weekend that was largely motivated by her thinking that Matt was running the game and that she was exposing Matt's like deceitfulness, when in reality, a lot of people were already sketched out by Matt by that point. And if anything, her blow up kind of made Matt a bit more sympathetic in some people's eyes. So I feel like that's not particularly great. You also have her seriously considering not putting up Matt after she made it pretty clear that she was against Matt after the veto, where she was pretty open to making a deal with Matt and to letting people like T-Core and Tucker volunteer for the block instead, which is not particularly great. And despite her being the first HOH, I feel like she's not in a very good spot at this point, where it feels like a lot of the people she had initially gotten together have kind of coalesced into their own power structure, and she's just kind of on the outs of that. Now, I don't necessarily think she's dead to rights, where I still think she has some people in the game, people like Quinn, for instance, that are open to working with her, but for the most part, I feel like she's coming to this next week kind of on her own and not really being on the in on a lot of things. And I feel like with how emotional she has demonstrated herself throughout the week, I wouldn't have much confidence in her to get back into a good position moving forward, unless she's just kind of picked up by one of these alliances that ends up falling down the road. So I'm not feeling too great about Angela at this point. I don't feel like she played this HOH week well, really at all, which is why she's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and I kind of debated this next placement. I wasn't entirely sure where to put this person considering where they are in the game right now, and I know this person is pretty popular online, but I feel like if we are looking at their game position, I'm a bit skeptical. But we do have T-Core here, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of T-Core here. Now, she is one of the more quiet people in the house. She hasn't really been as active in doing game talk compared to other people, which I do have some of those other people a bit higher on the list compared to T-Core, but despite this, the main reason that I have T-Core so low is that despite her not really being that active in the game, she's still not entirely safe, where Early on in the week, she was very much talked about as a potential nominee, and while Angela didn't go through with that, I do think that kind of speaks to how some people kind of see T-Core as a bit of a threat, which is kind of concerning there. You also have after the veto where Matt threw out her name as a potential replacement nominee, and Angela came pretty close to going through with that, where she thought that T-Core is volunteering for the block, and while I can't really fault T-Core for that necessarily, where I feel like that's more so Angela just being Angela, I think it also speaks to how T-Core is still being floated around as someone that could go up on the block in the future, which kind of makes me unsure with where to put T-Core here. Now, I think she has been doing more work in recent days where we know that she's working closely with Kimo. She also seems close enough to Angela to where she'll keep her safe, but I am still worried that T-Core could still be talked about as a potential nominee in future weeks, considering she was brought up as a potential nominee this week, both before and after the veto. And I feel like mixing that in with the fact that she is a bit more quiet in the game, someone who's not really building many connections outside of Kimo, I can't really have her any higher than number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have someone who I just mentioned, but we do have Kimo here. Now, I think Kimo's definitely on the upswing where we saw him yesterday being part of the Mr. Anderson's alliance with Cam, Quinn, and Tucker, which could give him some allies there moving forward, not to mention T-Core, who I just mentioned as well. I feel like Kimo is definitely starting to play the game more. However, I also worry that it may be a bit late for him, and he could still be in a not great position moving forward. Now, if you are looking at his game before that, he was definitely pretty quiet early on, where that was a major reason why he was put up, where he was seen as one of the less connected people game-wise, despite people liking him on a personal level. But instead, he had very little game talks in early days, and while that could have just been him holding back deliberately to avoid overplaying, it did lead to him being put up on the block here, and while at this point he's pretty lock safe where he should stay against both Kenny and Matt, I still worry that he could still be in a not great spot moving forward. Now, again, he does have some advantages here. He is part of the Mr. Anderson's alliance. He has T-Core. Quinn is also someone he's working with, where he's actually one of the only people to know about Quinn's power, which is all pretty good. There's definitely things to like about Kimo, and it wouldn't shock me if he ends up moving up on this list next week. But at the end of the day, I can't have him too much higher, considering he is still technically on the block right now. He is still not in the greatest position in the world, and even with his increased gameplay, I feel like there are other pieces in the house that are more powerful that he's not a part of, and I worry that could leave him in a bad spot next week. So I feel like until we actually see these elements of his game actually improve his position above these other power structures that have formed within the game, I can't really have him any higher than number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and I actually feel like this person's moving down compared to Kimo here, where I feel like this person came into this week in a much better position, but has kind of lost it as the week has gone on. But at number 10, we do have Leah here. And Leah's in a pretty interesting spot at this point, where early on, she seemed to be one of these middle people, where it seemed like she was trying to play both sides. However, key issue here is that she was kind of cop-playing both sides, where everyone in the house seemed to recognize that she was both working with the Angela group, but also with the Matt group. That's kind of exposed her a bit. But even beyond that, she is kind of sided with the Matt group, and is basically the third in the Matt, McKenzie, Leah trio here, which is not a great spot to be in at this point, considering that Matt is obviously a massive target right now, and McKenzie is someone who could easily save herself with America's veto. That kind of leaves Leah in an awkward spot here to where I could see a world where that trio becomes targeted in the following week, and Leah is just kind of sniped out of the game because of that. So I could definitely see a world where Leah is targeted as early as next week, depending on how all the Matt stuff goes down. Though at the same time, I don't think she can't recover per se, where Quinn is someone who wants to work with her by taking on Matt first and kind of picking Leah up as a result. So I definitely think that if Matt goes here this week, that could definitely leave Leah in a better spot moving forward. But I feel like with people starting to not really trust her and people kind of seeing her as kind of playing both sides too blatantly, and with her kind of being the third and the most expendable person within the Matt, McKenzie, Leah trio, I'm forced to leave her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have another person who's kind of in a rocky spot right now, but has one major thing keeping them safe in the short term, but we do have McKenzie here. And the only reason I have her this high is due to America's veto, where through that she essentially has a get out of jail free card that she can use for up to 4 weeks. And while on paper she could potentially just have another one of her allies go up as the replacement if she were to use it on herself, more than likely that probably would happen anyway if she had an HOH that was willing to put her up to begin with. So I feel like if anything, America's veto is a net positive for her game. And I feel like that's kind of keeping her alive here, as outside of that, she's not in a great spot. She's obviously close to Matt, which is not a great position to be in. I could see her potentially losing out Matt here, and if not this week, then next week she could be in some danger here. It's not looking great for McKenzie, but solely due to the fact that she has America's veto that she could use to save herself, I did decide to leave her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone who's kind of in a weird spot right now. I'm not really sure what to make of this person either, but number 8 we do have Joseph, and I feel like Joseph's also on a downward trajectory here, where coming into the week he was one of the people playing the middle, where he did have these connections to the Angela side but also with the Matt side, where he very much wanted to work with Matt, one of the only people that was willing to work with Matt even once people started to turn on him due to his strategy of wanting to use Matt as a shield to take out the other jocks before eventually turning on Matt himself. Though he kind of drops out once it's become apparent that Matt is such a big target in the house, but though I feel like outside of that, Joseph is kind of losing steam, where he is being left out of certain alliances, where he is left out of the Pentagon. You also have Angela not really trusting him that much. You also have Tucker thinking he has a power through an extra vote. I do think Joseph is losing favor in the house, and I think he did try to stick with Matt a bit too long, and I'm probably lower on him now than I was back on Friday. But at the end of the day, I feel like he's still in a better spot compared to all the other people we already talked about, which is why he's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and I'm actually a little surprised this person is this high, considering this is definitely one of the least active players in the house from a gameplay perspective. But at the same time, I don't see them being targeted at this point. But at number 7, I do have Rubina here. Now, Rubina is probably one of the least active players in the game, where we haven't really seen her be part of any game talks, where while she was part of the initial Angela power structure at the beginning of the week, once that crumbles, she's just kind of there in the game, kind of just relying on her social game. And she is pretty well liked in the house. I don't really see any people going after her. Plus, she also has a good relationship with Tucker that could pay dividends later on. So it's kind of a weird case where on one hand, I seriously consider putting her lower, considering how inactive she's been and considering how she's not really being included on any alliances. But on the other hand, I don't think she's being as targeted compared to those other people, where people like T-Core have been mentioned as a target. People like Kimo have already been nominated. I don't really see anyone putting up Rubina at this current point. And while she could go up as his pawn, I don't really see anyone actually going after her at this point. So that's the main reason why she isn't lower here, but with her not really doing much in the game, I do have to leave her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone very similar to Rubina in that they're not really playing that hard right now, but we do have Tucker. And Tucker was another person that I struggled to consider here, where on one hand, I think there's more knocks to Tucker's game right now compared to Rubina's, where you have him wanting to build this file 2 with Matt, only for Matt to turn it down and instead use that to throw Tucker under the bus. That's not particularly great. You also have his rivalry with Lisa, which, while I think he's kind of playing it up, I think that's also something that's kind of harming him, in the sense that Lisa is someone who's annoyed by him. And kind of similar to Rubina, I feel like he's been pretty passive in the game so far, not really building many alliances. Though at the same time, I think that also ties into a strategy from the preseason where he talks about how he didn't want to be out in front early on and kind of be the jokester. And so far, I think he's been mostly effective at that, where I feel like he has built pretty solid social connections up to this point with people like Rubina, people like Quinn, people like Joseph, for instance. And I feel like that's starting to translate into game, where you have Joseph wanting to use him as his jock figure. You have him being included in the Mr. Anderson's alliance. I think there is more going on with Tucker's game now that could pay dividends later on. And he's kind of in a similar spot to Kimo, where he's kind of on the upswing here. Now, at the same time, I do wish that he talked more game with people, and I feel like we still need to see whether this will actually pan out or not. But I feel like mixing in the potential we're starting to see now more with Tucker, mixing in the fact that he wasn't being targeted in the same way that Kimo was, I did decide to leave him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and this top 5 are all members of the Pentagon, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But at number 5, we probably have the person who is the most likely to be targeted of this 5, but we do have Cedric here. And Cedric is definitely a mixed bag for me gameplay-wise, where on one hand, there's definitely a debate for him being higher than the next person we'll be talking about, considering he is technically within the core of the Pentagon, that being Cam, Cedric, and Chelsea, which should put him in a good spot if the Pentagon ends up being this true alliance that dominates a season, not to mention the fact that he ends up being in this pretty good spot despite his game being downgraded, despite him not having an actual vote, which should have made him this pretty easy pawn to put up, but instead Angela wanted to work with him and included him within her initial power structure, which is also a pretty good sign here. So I think there's definitely a lot to like with Cedric, and I feel like his game has definitely gotten better as the week has gone along. But on the other hand, I feel like he's probably the most danger of this five of being targeted in the near future, where we saw early on in the week that Matt wanted to target him due to him being pretty clearly on the Angel side of things. I think he's also someone who's seen as a pretty loyal number, someone that reminds me a lot of Joseph from BB24, where even though he is like a pretty loyal number, I feel like that also makes him a target to people not in his alliance. That could potentially put him in danger if the wrong person wins HOH, and could also leave him scrambling if his power structure ends up crumbling later on in the game. So I feel like of this five, he's probably in the most danger of being targeted in the short term compared to these people. And even if the Pentagon ends up running the game and they end up making it to the jury, I could still see Cedric being the easiest person to target of that five, due to him like fitting like this archetype of someone who's pretty likable, someone who is pretty outspoken and has a lot of charisma, but also someone who seems to be a pretty stereotypical comp threat. So I do worry a lot about Cedric's prospects moving forward, but I still think he did pretty good work this week at integrating himself within the core power structure and making himself part of the core of that power structure. So I feel like there's enough good work there to praise with Cedric, but enough worry about his future target that leaves him here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have another person in the Pentagon that has kind of surprised me during the season, and here we have Brooklyn. And so far, Brooklyn has proven me wrong, where I came into the season thinking that she was going to be this very aggressive player, someone who was going to be way too out in front and be targeted as a result. But instead, I feel like she's been doing a decent job at integrating herself within the power structure. Now, she's still a pretty active player in the game, someone who is like having all these options, but she's someone who at least is not as out in front compared to other people, and I feel like there's definitely a lot to praise here, where she does build a final 2 with Angela after she wins HOH. She also is able to be part of these various alliances, including the Pentagon, and I feel like she does play both sides pretty well for the most part, and I feel like that puts her in a good spot moving forward. No one's really talking about her as a potential threat, and I feel like Brooklyn should be in a decent spot moving forward. Though with that said, I still have some question marks over where she's truly going in the game. We're obviously within the Pentagon, she's kind of on the outs of that core, and I feel like if it gets down to the Pentagon, she'll kind of be in a rough spot there. So clearly she's going to have to like consider other options. And while she has the barbershop that she can lean on if Matt ends up staying in the game, I feel like for now that's not really a legitimate long-term solution there. So I feel like she'll probably have to do more work beyond that. So I do feel like Brooklyn is kind of in a good spot for the most part. I feel like she is definitely having plenty of allies and is in a good spot at this point, which is why she's here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we definitely have another pretty interesting player to get into here. But number 3, we do have Quinn, and Quinn is in a very good spot right now. I feel like he's done a very good job at ingratiating himself with most of the house. He's one of these people that's been playing the middle pretty well. And I feel like he has one of the most options in the game right now, where he's part of the Pentagon, but not in the core of that, which could be a problem for him later on in the game. But he also has the Mr. Anderson's alliance. He also has his collective with Angela and Kimo. He has good bonds with most of the house, which will definitely make him pretty safe moving forward. Not to mention that he has the deepfake HOH, which is a really overpowered twist, which kind of breaks the game depending on how it's used. So I feel like Quinn has a lot going on for him in the game right now. He's part of a lot of alliances. Everyone loves him. No one's really going after him right now. And he has this really broken advantage. However, I still have some reservations with him that kind of leave him a bit lower here, where for one, I do think some people are recognizing that he's well positioned in the game that could make him a threat later on. So I do worry about that to a degree. And I also don't love the way that he's handling the deepfake HOH, where not only has he told people about it, namely Angela and Kimo, but he also has this really dumb plan for how he wants to use it, where he essentially wants to use it on his own HOH week in order to make people think that Lisa had the advantage instead, which feels pretty misguided in my eyes, as not only does it kind of rob him of the chance of using the HOH to build his own power structure, he's also burning a week of safety that he could have had he held on to the advantage. And he's also setting himself up to get caught, considering he told people that he had the advantage, and he even told Kimo about this plan for how he wants to use it. So I don't really love the way that he's handling it, and I feel like it could lead to him being caught and being put in a worse spot because of that. And while it's possible he may not actually execute this plan in this way, I still think that could lead to him not really playing in his best interest at all points, even though he's still playing pretty actively. but I still think there's enough there to praise about Quinn to where he's this high on the list. But there are enough reservations to where I do have him here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and funnily enough, this is actually the same top 2 as I had in my preseason power ranking, which I did not expect at all, and it's actually the same order, but number 2 we do have Chelsea, and I think Chelsea is arguably in the best position in the house right now. We're very similar to Quinn. She is in a pretty solid power structure, that being the Pentagon. That could be a big force moving forward. She's also part of the barbershop. She has very strong bonds with a decent amount of people in the house. No one's really going after her. And I feel like she's kind of kept her options open pretty well to where she has this solid core of Cam and Cedric that seems pretty solid. She also has good relationships with Joseph and Quinn. She was actually the one to convince Joseph to drop Matt when he was considering working with Matt. I feel like Chelsea has played this first week pretty well, and again, despite the fact that she was downgraded, despite the fact that she doesn't have a vote, she's really been able to use that to her advantage, where despite her being one of the biggest proponents of targeting Matt, she's able to use the fact that she doesn't have a vote to where even if Matt stays, she's able to remain good, as she's never actually had to vote Matt out there. So I do feel like Chelsea's in a pretty good spot here. I feel pretty good about her, and that's a big reason why she's here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 26 at this point is still Cam. And I feel like Cam is also in a pretty solid spot where, again, he has the solid core of him, Cedric, and Chelsea. He's also part of the Pentagon. He's part of the barbershops. He's now part of the Mr. Anderson's alliance. He is able to be pulled into all these various groups despite him not really playing that actively, which kind of ties into what I said in my preseason power ranking, where he fits his pretty standard archetype of someone that does well in Big Brother, someone who has his pretty athletic build, someone you would assume would do well in competitions, but also someone who's pretty laid back and someone who's non-confrontational, which in turn leads to people wanting to include him in their alliances, thinking that he'll help their game by winning competitions, someone who is going to be with them all the way. And I think that's worked to Cam's benefit pretty well, where he is included in all these alliances. He's in one of the best positions in the house as well. And I feel like that trio of Cam, Cedric, and Chelsea could do pretty well across the season. But I feel like with Cam being someone who I'm still pretty high on, someone who I feel like pretty standardly wins a lot of seasons on Big Brother, and with Cam not really doing anything to deter that perception, I'm still going to have him here at number 1, even though Chelsea could arguably be in a better position than him right now. But I feel like with Cam not really having to play super hard and still be included in various alliances, I'm going to give him the edge here, which is why he's here at number 1. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm on Patreon as well as YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.